On the 17th of May 1968, Wilbur Riddle was walking along US Route 25 near Sadie'ville, Kentucky, searching for glass telephone pole insulators left behind by repair crews. He collected them, painted them, and sold them as decorative items. It was an ordinary Saturday morning, the sort of day that should have been unremarkable. Instead, Riddle stumbled upon something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the bushes near the highway, just over a fence beside the road, he noticed an odd bundle wrapped in dark green canvas. Curious, he pulled at it, but it slipped from his hands and rolled down the short embankment towards Eagle Creek. When Riddle walked down to retrieve it, he caught the smell, that horrible, unmistakable odor of death. He ran to the nearest petrol station and rang the sheriff. When authorities arrived and cut away the canvas, they found the badly decomposed body of a young woman, tied at both ends with clothesline wire. She appeared to be in her late teens, small in stature, with reddish-brown hair. She had been dead for at least 2 weeks, possibly 3. The canvas wrapping was the type used for tents. A local reporter coined a name that would stick for 3 decades. Tent Girl. Welcome to Vanishing Threads. Today we're exploring the case of Tent Girl, not just as an unsolved murder, but as a landmark moment in the history of internet investigation. In 1968, a young woman's body was found wrapped in canvas beside a Kentucky highway. For 30 years she remained nameless despite extensive police efforts. Then, in 1998, a factory worker with no detective training did what law enforcement couldn't. Using nothing more than a computer, an internet connection, and relentless determination, he identified her. Todd Matthews is widely credited as one of the first amateur sleuths to solve a cold case using the internet, and his success changed the way missing persons investigations are conducted forever. Georgetown, Kentucky, in 1968 was a small city of about 8,000 people, the county seat of Scott County. It lay along the Interstate 75 corridor, midway between Cincinnati and Lexington. The area where Tent Girl's body was found was rural, with scattered farms and woods. It wasn't a place where bodies turned up, and the discovery shocked the community. The autopsy was conducted at St. Joseph Hospital in Lexington by Deputy Coroner Kenneth Grant and his team. The examination revealed limited but crucial information. The victim was Caucasian, approximately 5 feet 1 inch tall, weighing between 110 and 115 pounds. Her age was estimated at 16 to 19 years old, based on her bone development and physical appearance. She had short reddish-brown hair and no identifying marks, scars, or piercings. She had not been shot, and she had not been pregnant. The pathologists found slight discoloration on her skull, suggesting she had been killed by a blow to the head. There was no evidence of poisons or toxic materials. The state of decomposition indicated she had been dead for approximately 2 to 3 weeks before discovery. With extraordinary luck, forensic examiners managed to recover a single fingerprint from her badly decomposed hand. Scott County Attorney Virgil Pyra coordinated the investigation, bringing in Coroner Dr. Frank Cleveland to perform a more detailed autopsy. The findings confirmed the initial assessment, but added little new information. The young woman had been murdered, that much was certain. But who she was and why she'd been killed remained mysteries. Police distributed her description statewide. A sketch artist from the Covington Police Department, Harold Musser, studied autopsy photographs for a week before producing a portrait showing how the girl might have looked in life. The sketch was published across Kentucky and beyond. Tips poured in. Hundreds of families with missing daughters contacted police. Each lead was investigated. None matched. The problem was that Tent Girl was remarkably average in appearance. She was the generic girl next door. Literally hundreds of missing young women fit her physical description. Without distinguishing features, unusual scars, tattoos, birthmarks, identification proved impossible. The fingerprint recovered from her remains was run through every database available. No matches were found. By 1971, 3 years after the body was discovered, no family had come forward to claim Tent Girl. Authorities made the decision to bury her. A local company donated a headstone inscribed with the details of the case. The inscription read, "Tent Girl, found on May 17, 1968, on US Highway 25 North. Died about April 26th through May 3rd, 1968. Age about 16 to 19 years. Height 5 feet 1 inch. Weight 110 to 115 pounds. Reddish-brown hair, unidentified. The stone also featured an engraving of the police sketch. She was laid to rest in Georgetown Cemetery, her grave a monument to failure. The failure to give her back her name. The case went cold and was declared unsolvable by the FBI. It joined the ranks of America's thousands of unidentified dead. For the next 16 years, Tent Girl lay forgotten except by those directly involved in the case. One of those people was Wilbur Riddle, the man who had found her body. The discovery had profoundly affected him, though he rarely spoke of it. In October 1987, Riddle's daughter Lori attended a Halloween party with friends. The teenagers began trading ghost stories, trying to frighten one another with tales of the supernatural. Lori told them about the real horror story from her family's history, the day her father discovered a dead body wrapped in canvas in the woods. One of the teenagers listening was 17-year-old Todd Matthews, Lori's boyfriend. The story affected Matthews in a way he couldn't quite explain. He began asking questions. What had happened to the investigation? Had the girl ever been identified? Lori didn't know. Matthews asked to speak with her father. Wilbur Riddle recounted the discovery in detail. He described the location, the smell, the canvas wrapping, the condition of the body. He spoke about how the case had bothered him for nearly 20 years, how he wondered who the girl had been, whether she had family somewhere who still wondered what had happened to her. Matthews listened, and something shifted inside him. He decided he would try to find out who Tent Girl was. Matthews had no training in investigation. He was a factory worker at an auto parts manufacturing plant, earning minimum wage. But he had time, and he had determination. He began visiting the Georgetown library, combing through old newspaper articles about the case. He traveled to Tent Girl's grave, standing before the headstone with its sketch of an unidentified girl. He contacted local newspapers, asking if they had additional information in their archives. He made long-distance phone calls, expensive in the 1980s, to various police departments and missing persons organizations. For the next 10 years, Matthews pursued every lead he could find. He spent money he could barely afford on phone bills and travel. His obsession with the case grew. "I don't want to say I was dangerously obsessed," he later recalled, "but I was very into that case. I determined, I'm going to try to find her family." When he wasn't at work, he was investigating Tent Girl. His wife Lori, whom he had married within a year of that Halloween party, understood his compulsion, though it sometimes strained their relationship. The investigation was frustrating. In the days before the internet, tracking missing persons required contacting individual police departments, waiting for responses, following paper trails that often led nowhere. Matthews would get excited about a lead, only to have it collapse when details didn't match. He tried to interest television programs in the case, hoping media coverage might generate new information. He contacted Unsolved Mysteries multiple times. They weren't interested. Then, in the mid-1990s, everything changed. The internet became widely accessible to the public. Matthews got online and discovered a world he hadn't known existed, message boards and websites dedicated to cold cases and missing persons. Amateur detectives from across the country were sharing information, comparing cases, trying to solve mysteries that law enforcement had given up on. Matthews was no longer alone in his obsession. In November 1997, exactly 10 years after he'd first heard about Tent Girl, Matthews created a website, tentgirl.com. He posted everything he knew about the case, physical descriptions, the circumstances of discovery, the police sketch. He hoped that someone, somewhere, might recognize the information and contact him. Months passed with no significant leads. Matthews continued his search on other platforms, combing through missing persons databases that were beginning to appear online. In January 1998, Matthews was browsing an online classified site, a precursor to Craigslist, when he came across a post that made his heart race. A woman in Arkansas was searching for her missing sister. The details matched. The woman had gone missing from Lexington, Kentucky, approximately 15 miles from Georgetown, in late 1967. She was described as 5 feet 2 inches tall with brown hair and brown eyes. Her name was Barbara Ann Hackman. Matthews immediately sent an email to the contact address, Rosemary Westbrook of Benton, Arkansas. 3 days later, they spoke on the phone. Westbrook described her sister. Barbara had been 24 years old when she disappeared, older than authorities had estimated for Tent Girl, but not impossibly so. She had been married to a carnival worker named George Earl Taylor and had an 8-month-old daughter. Her husband had told the family that Barbara had left him for another man, but no one had heard from her since late 1967. The family had assumed she was somewhere starting a new life. Matthews asked about distinguishing features. Westbrook mentioned that her sister had a distinctive gap between her 2 front teeth. Matthews felt a surge of excitement. Tent Girl had the same gap. Other details aligned. The timing worked. The location was right. Both men believed they had found the answer, but belief wasn't proof. Matthews contacted the Scott County Sheriff's Office. He explained what he'd found, the connections he'd made. The authorities were skeptical, but intrigued. Rosemary Westbrook also contacted the sheriff's office, providing photographs of her sister and confirming details about her appearance. After reviewing the evidence, officials agreed there was sufficient cause to exhume Tent Girl's body. On the 2nd of March 1998, 30 years after she'd been buried, Tent Girl was exhumed. Bone and tooth samples were extracted and sent to a laboratory in North Carolina specializing in DNA testing. The remains were in poor condition after 3 decades, requiring multiple attempts to extract viable genetic material. Rosemary Westbrook provided a DNA sample via cheek swab for comparison. Dr. Emily Craig, a forensic anthropologist with Kentucky's Medical Examiner's Office, supervised the analysis. She also conducted a new examination of the remains, correcting the original age estimate. Based on skeletal development, Craig determined that Tent Girl had been between 20 and 30 years old when she died, not a teenager as originally believed. This brought her age into alignment with Barbara Hackman, who had been 24. The DNA testing required multiple attempts due to the condition of the remains. For Westbrook, it was an agonizing wait. She paced her home, worrying that she'd made a mistake in disturbing the grave of someone who might not be her sister. In late April 1998, almost exactly 30 years after Tent Girl had been found, the results came back. The DNA was a perfect match. Tent Girl was Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor. After 3 decades, she had her name back. At a press conference on the 23rd of April at the Scott County Courthouse, officials announced the identification. Dr. Craig addressed the media. From the physical evidence and from the circumstances, I would be most amazed if the two were not one and the same. Scott County officials declared the case an active homicide investigation once again. The story that emerged was heartbreaking. Barbara Ann Hackman had been born on the 12th of September 1943 in Illinois. By late 1967, she was living in Lexington, Kentucky, working in a restaurant. She had 3 young children and was married to George Earl Taylor, a carnival worker. According to later accounts, Taylor had a hard temper and was described by those who knew him as controlling and jealous. He always insisted Barbara travel with him. In December 1967, Barbara disappeared. Taylor told her family she had left him for another man. He never filed a missing persons report. Barbara's family, believing she was alive somewhere, didn't report her missing either. They assumed she'd contact them when she was ready. Her parents thought she was living in Florida. None of them connected her disappearance with the unidentified body found 6 months later, just 10 miles from where she'd last been seen. By the time Barbara was identified, George Earl Taylor was long dead. He'd succumbed to cancer in October 1987, 11 years before his wife's identity was confirmed. He was never officially charged with her murder, though investigators and family members believe he was responsible. Taylor had been a carnival worker with easy access to the type of canvas in which Barbara's body was wrapped. He had reported Barbara missing to no one, instead telling her family she'd run away. When police tried to question him about Barbara's whereabouts in the years after her disappearance, he maintained the story that she'd left him. The identification brought closure to Barbara's family, but also immense grief. Rosemary Westbrook and her sisters, Jan Deigel and Marie Copeland, had spent 30 years believing their sister was alive somewhere. Now they learned she'd been murdered and buried under a false name whilst they'd still been hoping to hear from her. Barbara's daughter, who had been only 8 months old when her mother disappeared, had grown up, married, and had children of her own. She'd never known what happened to her mother. Now, finally, she had answers. On the 26th of April 1998, Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor was reburied in Georgetown Cemetery. Her family commissioned a new headstone placed beneath the original Tent Girl marker. It bore her full birth name. They deliberately excluded her married name Taylor, along with her nickname Bobby, and the dates of her life. September 12, 1943 to approximately December 1967, the family wanted nothing of Earl Taylor attached to her final resting place. The impact of the Tent Girl identification extended far beyond one family's closure. Todd Matthews had accomplished something unprecedented. He was, by most accounts, the first amateur sleuth to solve a cold case using the internet. The case demonstrated the power of online databases and communication networks to connect information across vast distances and time periods. It showed that determined individuals with no formal training could accomplish what official investigations had failed to achieve. Matthews's success inspired him to help others. In 1999, a woman named Jennifer Mara of Michigan created a website called the Doe Network, a database of long-term missing persons and unidentified victims. Matthews joined the effort, bringing his experience and passion to the project. When Mara turned control of the site over to Helene Wallström of Sweden in 2001, Matthews's involvement deepened. He headed a cold cases Yahoo group that merged with the Doe Network, recruiting volunteers to assist in matching missing persons with unidentified remains. The Doe Network grew into an international database containing thousands of cases. It became a model for how citizen volunteers could assist law enforcement in solving cold cases. Matthews became a prominent figure in the missing persons community, recognized as a pioneer of internet-based investigation. His work caught the attention of the United States Department of Justice, which consulted him on approaches to missing persons cases. In 2011, Matthews was hired as the Director of Case Management and Communications for NAMUS, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, a Department of Justice database. His journey from factory worker obsessed with a single Jane Doe to a professional working at the national level was extraordinary. "I'm not sure my father-in-law knew the impact of the identification of the Tent Girl in my life," Matthews said. "It was creating a second identity for me." The Tent Girl case has been featured in numerous documentaries and true crime programs, including Investigation Discovery's Who Killed Jane Doe, and podcasts such as My Favorite Murder, Crime Junkie, and Anatomy of Murder. The case is taught in courses on forensic science and digital investigation as an example of how technology changed cold case work. Yet Barbara's murder remains officially unsolved. Whilst George Earl Taylor is the prime suspect, and most who know the case believe he killed her, he was never charged, never tried, never convicted. He died taking whatever he knew about Barbara's final hours to his grave. Without his confession or additional evidence, the case cannot be formally closed. Barbara Ann Hackman Taylor is no longer Tent Girl, but justice for her death remains elusive. The case raises questions about how many other unidentified victims might be identified if their information were more widely accessible. At the time Matthews began his investigation, an estimated 40,000 unidentified bodies lay in medical examiners' offices across America. "I thought there was one," Matthews recalled. "I couldn't imagine that there were possibly 40,000. The scale of the problem was staggering. The internet has since transformed how these cases are handled. Databases like the Doe Network, NameUS, and others have made information accessible to anyone with an internet connection. families searching for missing loved ones can now compare descriptions and circumstances across state and national boundaries. Amateur investigators can spot patterns and connections that isolated local authorities might miss. DNA technology has improved dramatically, allowing identifications from smaller and more degraded samples. Yet challenges remain. Not all Jane and John Does are entered into databases. Not all missing persons are reported. Privacy laws and bureaucratic obstacles sometimes prevent information sharing. And despite technological advances, many cases remain unsolved simply because no one is looking. No one is comparing the data. No one is making the connections. Matthews spent the rest of his life advocating for the unidentified dead. He believed that every person deserves their name, that every family deserves answers. His work inspired countless others to join the effort, to spend their free time combing through databases, making connections, giving names back to the nameless. Todd Matthews died recently, leaving behind a legacy that transformed how cold cases are investigated. The teenager who heard a ghost story at a Halloween party and couldn't let it go became the man who proved that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they refused to accept that some mysteries must remain unsolved. In Georgetown Cemetery, 2 headstones stand together over a single grave. The first, donated in 1971, bears the name Tent Girl and a sketch of an unidentified face. The second, placed in 1998, bears the name Barbara Ann Hackman and the dates of a life cut short. Together, they tell a story of loss, determination, and the power of one person's refusal to let a name be forgotten. The internet has changed how we investigate crime, how we share information, how we connect across distances. The Tent Girl case was one of the first demonstrations of that power. Todd Matthews showed that you didn't need a badge or formal training to make a difference. You needed curiosity, determination, and a willingness to spend your nights searching databases whilst others slept. You needed to believe that someone who died nameless deserved better. Barbara Ann Hackman. Taylor waited 30 years for someone to care enough to keep looking. In Todd Matthews, she found that person. In doing so, she gave him purpose, and he gave her back her name. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay curious, stay safe,